You're tuned into the Writing Community Chat Show, the live streaming YouTube podcast that brings you the stories of authors, screenwriters, and more. Indie or established, this show's for the community, and we invite you to be a part of it. Head to the writingcommunitychatshow.com for more info. The WCCS. Together as one, we get it done.
Hello and welcome to the Writing Community Chat Show. Hello and welcome to the Writing Community Chat Show. I love being back on the show. I say it every week. It's been a long week for me, so to get here and to enjoy and relax is what I love to do. And to get to chat to Chris and a wonderful new guest. So hello, Chris. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, Agate. How are you?
Like I said, it's been a big week. We've had inspections in work, and it's been a bit hectic around that as well. So I definitely felt that Friday was needed today. And by the time I got home, I just needed to sleep. I needed to relax. I had a nice coffee, a shower, ready for the show. So I now feel like the weekend is upon us. And yeah, definitely needed.
This is the second week in a row that you've told me and admitted that you've had a nap.
Well, yeah, I'm getting old. Naps in the afternoon is kind of what I go for now.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
I mean, you do it. You look great, so it's obviously working.
I didn't earlier, and I shared a video to say tune into the show tonight. And I looked at it and went, "Oh wow!" I was at a funny angle. My chin was sticking out. I had big hair everywhere. I thought I'm going to the shower. But yeah, so that was a motivational video for myself. But yeah, I think I am getting old because I like going for nice hikes these days. I caught myself watching Escape to the Country the other day, and things like that. So I think I'm moving into that era.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you are, mate. But just embrace it, just enjoy it. It's meant to be a good era. So yeah, have fun with it. Definitely.
Oh, there's a bit of thunder going on outside.
Ooh.
Lovely end to the summer. Chris, how's your writing been this week? I'm still struggling I'm just juggling a lot of stuff at the moment, and I'm torn between writing the historical fantasy fiction that I started and converting my screenplay back into a novel. So I'm just in between everything, and I haven't got my priorities set up. For me, it's a bit of a juggling process. How is it for you at the moment? I noticed you've written a lot of good Substacks, and I have been catching up on those. They're fantastic. So what about your fiction writing?
Yeah, I've decided that I'm going to get into a bit of a routine of non-fiction in the week and fiction Friday, Saturday, Sunday, which, yeah, I think it's just going to separate it in my mind a little bit because I've been doing some non-fiction writing, obviously, this week. And I think I'm getting to grips with kind of like what I want to say and what my voice is and what I have to offer, and why people should read and things like that. Like, that's quite difficult to get your head around a little bit. But the universe tried to mess with me. So yesterday, I sent out a article that I wrote about finding the positives in life. So I've challenged myself this week to every time I think a negative thought, I combat that with 2 immediate positive thoughts.
Okay.
And I look for them. And I wrote this article and I said, I've been doing this. I reckon you could probably benefit from it. And I sent it out. And it was about 11 o'clock that I sent this on Substack last night. And 3 o'clock, I woke up from one of those nightmares. And I'm going to write about this because I've already started anyway. But I woke up from one of those nightmares that feels real. And it feels like your life has ended. Not your life has ended in terms of you died, but as in anything that could go wrong in your life has gone wrong. So I woke up and I thought, I can't sleep now. So I was up at 3 o'clock and I thought, right, find the positives. You've literally just wrote an article about it. So the positives for me were I looked out the window and the sun was rising. And I've not watched the sun rise for a while. So I sat there in my office and I watched the sun rise. And I thought, oh, this is really nice. And I got a coffee and I thought, there are the positives. Literally, as soon as I finished my coffee, my eldest son, he's coughing his guts up in his bed. Bear in mind, he's not done anything up until this point. So it's clear that he can't go to school. And we've just started back at school this week. So one of us has got to take the day off. So then, again, it's not ideal, but find the positives. Where are the positives? So if I stay off, I get to stay with him and care for my son. Vice versa, if the missus does, gets to care for him and things like that. And then because we've got two, one of us is left with the other, so you can be a good parent essentially. So again, another positive. And then I get to work, got a busy day at work. Before I get to work, so this is the fun bit. I'm ironing my shirt downstairs because it was decided that I would go to work. And the iron stops, and I look at the iron and I think, what's going on? My electric's gone downstairs, all gone out. So I'm like, what do I do now? All the electric's gone. I'm running around trying to fix it, can't sort it. It's making me later and later. I've got to take one of my children to nursery, drop him off. So I'm later and later. I'm sat in traffic. I'm thinking, find the positives. I did, and my day continued to get worse from that I woke up. So I am going to write about it, and I will drop it later. But I'm still staying true to find the positives, because I think despite the horrible day that I've had, I felt good all the way through. And I was even laughing to myself because I was thinking, this feels like I'm in the Truman Show and the audience has just voted, oh, he's wrote that thing. Wouldn't it be really funny if we did all these things that tested him today? So yeah, that is how it's going. And I will write about it.
Well, I love that. And what a great message that despite how things go, you can stay positive. And that's a real message that I think translates to the writing world, because the amount of doubts we go through and the procrastinations and all that great stuff that we do as authors, I think having that mentality, oh, I had another rejection, but the positives are this, and this, and I had feedback from my work, adapt and move forward, right? Anna, thank you for your comment. She said the positive was you managed not to kill anybody. Congratulations.
Yes, that is a positive. Yeah. But there is beauty in everything that you see, and if you look for negatives, you'll find them. But if you look for positives, you'll find them as well. And I think our natural default is to go, oh, what's worst case scenario?
Yeah.
And then you can easily go on that trajectory when you just start to go down and down and down, and your mental health really suffers. So absolutely. I think just look for them. I had fun with it yesterday, and I called it positivity hunting. And I said it's hunting, but you don't need a license. You just need to look.
Lovely.
So, yeah.
I like that. Okay, let's get tonight's guest on because we're going to have a great chat, and I'm sure we'll probably run out of time with the amount of stuff we want to get talking about and enjoying. So we'll talk with our guest as soon as I've introduced him, which I'll do now. So tonight we have an incredibly special guest joining us, someone who's mastered the art of storytelling across multiple platforms. He is the author of the much-loved Witches of Woodville series, a screenwriter whose latest film, Unwelcome, has taken the horror world by storm, which I've watched and it's fantastic, and the co-host of the award-winning Bestseller Experiment podcast, which we just discussed before the show. So we'll have an update on that shortly, which has inspired countless writers across the globe and won an award last year. So please join me in welcoming Mark Stay to the show. Hello, Mark. Welcome to the show.
Hello, gents. How are you? Thank you so much for letting me crash your party here. I'm honoured. Absolutely delighted. I'm seeing these names at the bottom: Ian Rankin, Sarah Pimbrough, Mark Billingham, Julia. I'm not worthy. This is so. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
You are very, very welcome, and we're glad that you are crashing our party because we're going to have a great chat, and we hope you're all well. How's life for Mark?
Oh, tickety boo, very tickety boo. It's I've come out of an incredibly busy period. I was listening to Chris there. You're always looking for the positives, but I've come out of an incredibly busy period. I'm at the moment I'm only working on about 3 things.
Not bad.
But you will never hear me complain because I've had the day job, I've had the commute, and now I get to sit in this room and hunch over my notepad and make stuff up all day, which is living the dream, frankly. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And we did chat about this before you came on, but I want to go over it because it's great. Your setup, your little hideaway space is fantastic. You got a lot of memorabilia there, a lot of books. It's a real nice place to come and create, right?
It's like a creche for a grown-up. Action figures and books and films and a guitar there as well and stuff like that. Yeah, it's just it's we moved out here 7 years ago, and we're in the middle of nowhere in North Kent, and it's great because my wife's a gardener, so and she, you know, it's this was always her dream to live in the country, and yeah, it had this. This is a spare room essentially. That folds out into a bed, but it's my office, and it's where I used to write on my commute into work, and then in my lunch break, and on the commute home. My commute now is down a set of stairs, you know, in my gym jams. That's living the dream. We had a Sainsbury's delivery today, and the Sainsbury's delivery driver was really perky. He said, "How are we today? Living the dream?" I said, "Yes, I am." I said, "The wages could be a bit better, but yes, I am. Definitely. I'm not going to complain."
Yeah, because living the dream normally in Britain is quite an ironic saying that you're not really living the dream. There is definitely some big lightning and thunder happening outside my window right now. Hopefully nothing happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, being in the countryside with a wife who loves gardening, I guess she's got a lot of time to go and do that now. Do you find that?
No, she's propping up my writing career. If
okay.
There is a gardening business, so what you have to realize, Kent is full of, I have to say, elderly people with massive gardens they can't look after anymore. So she's incredibly busy, and yeah, she's you know, and she gets to travel all around, and she's also a bell ringer as well. So she's been all around, you know, North Kent, and this place, moving here did inspire me as well, you know, because the Witches of Woodville series is set during the Second World War in a fictional village in Kent, which I decided to basically put at the foot of our garden, because, you know, that echoes of the war are still around us. There are pillboxes there. There's a Spitfire museum, you know, and it just I just thought, yeah, let's set this village here. I can really do something with this.
Well, what you need to do now, because I'm completely attracted to that idea of where you're living, you need to create a little writer's retreat that we can come and stay in, so I can go and see all those wonderful things. Because I love my World War II history, and going to see pillboxes. Spitfire Museum would be amazing. So yeah, that sounds great. Incredible place.
It's great. Yeah, let's talk. Have your people speak to me.
We are the people.
We'll pull out bed in the office.
Yeah. Brilliant. So what we're going to do, we're going to play part one video, and we're going to have a look at your road to writing and kind of find out, with a career that you've had in publishing and writing novels and screenplays, we want to kind of find out how that all started for you and what your inspirations were. So part one video coming up, and we'll dive into it. So, Mark, the road to writing, where did it all start for you? And do you remember kind of at what point it was a hobby and when it transitioned into kind of something more serious? How was that for you? And do you know where that started?
I was always very creative. I was very lucky in that I had parents who always encouraged that sort of thing, teachers who encouraged that sort of thing. And it's, I mean, my parents were cleaners. You know, dad was a school caretaker, mum was a cleaner. But what they would do, and this goes for uncles and aunts in my family as well, they come back from work and they say, "You'll never guess what happened to me today." And they were gifted storytellers. They knew how to tell a joke. They knew how to tell a story. They knew how to tease a yarn, you know. And I just grew up in an environment where we would tell each other these kind of shaggy dog stories, you know, very much in that kind of Billy Connolly vein, if you like. Yes. So I always grew up around people telling stories and having a good laugh. And then I wrote stuff at school, which, you know, teachers liked and encouraged me, which I think is just so important. And then when I was a teenager, after school, me and some friends used to write sketches. And we thought we were going to be the next Monty Python. Having reread some of them recently, no chance. We definitely weren't. But we learned a lot. We learned a lot about writing, structure, comedy. We made a short film. Which made no sense whatsoever, except there was one scene. It was about a revolution in a school. And I remember we had to go to an industrial estate where some company had an editing suite. This was how difficult it was to edit videos there. I remember we cut together this sequence of kids running out of classrooms into the hall, and it was a little montage of stuff cut together. And I thought, that actually looks like something you'd see on telly. That actually looks like a movie, you know? So I was totally hooked by the idea of filmmaking then. So I wanted to act as well. So my wife and I both auditioned for drama school. We got married quite young.
Yeah.
And she got the grant. That's how old I am. And and I was working at Waterstones at the time. And I started at Waterstones in Dorking, which then was the smallest shop in the whole Waterstones empire. And I only meant to stay for Christmas. And this was when Waterstones only took people with degrees. I didn't have a degree. I didn't go to university. But I was always in there. I used to work in a hi-fi shop across the road. I was in there every lunch break, reading and buying books and stuff. They said, well, you're always in here and you know sci-fi. None of us know science fiction, so you can run the science fiction section. Stayed for Christmas. Another member of staff left. They said, do you want to stay on? And I was just hooked. This was my foot in the door to the weird and wonderful world of publishing. And, you know, I'd see sales reps every week. I'd do the buying, I'd do the returns, I'd run the section, I'd learn about core stock. And then when my wife got into drama school, I went to the store in Wimbledon, which, you know, was a whole nother level. And then I helped open the Epsom store, where I became an assistant manager. But we wanted to have kids, and you can't really do that on a bookseller's wages. So I sold myself for a company car and became a rep for Headline Publishing, which was wonderful because I drove all over the Southeast and, you know, met booksellers all over the Southeast and met loads of authors and met editors and discovered how the whole machine of publishing worked and learned, you know, all the inside and out of it all. While this is going on, my wife and I were staging plays. We started doing other people's plays. And then I wanted to do a Johnny Spate play, you know, who did Alf Garnett, and he died. And I think the family withdrew the rights. So I had a venue booked and no play. So I wrote a play about all the terrible camping holidays my parents had taken me on when I was a kid. And we staged it, and it went down really well. Now, like I said, growing up, I didn't know anyone in the entertainment industry. It was a whole alien thing to me. I dreamed of making films or whatever. It was but by then, my one friend in the entertainment industry, my friend called Jeremy, who was what they called a cable basher on TFI Friday. You know, they're the guys who used to carry the cables around after the cameraman. And he said, he knew a few showbiz people. And he said to me, look, there's too many actors and not enough writers. Keep writing. And that was 25 years ago. In fact, it might be 25 years ago this week, because it was just before my daughter was born, and she's going to be 25 in December. And the play, my wife was in it, and I had to write that she was pregnant because she was actually pregnant at the time. So actually, yeah, I think it was 25 years ago that I did my first play. Wow. I'm going to have to look that up. And that encouraged me, for better or worse, to keep writing plays. So we did sort of a play a year for a few years while we were raising, you know, young children. And it was, you know, we were very lucky in that parents were able to babysit and that sort of thing. And we wound up doing the Edinburgh Festival in 2003. And what I discovered was I'm not a natural playwright, but I did love, most of my scripts were kind of films on stage, if you like. They had the kind of pacing of film. So I turned one of them into a screenplay. That got me an agent. And you know, that I've been through a few agents in my time. You know, I did that thing of just the first agent who showed any interest into it. I clung on to them, you know, hello, love me. And it didn't quite work, you know, but I learned a lot from that. I managed to get a film agent out of that as well. And that's how I met John Wright. I set up a meeting with John Wright. He's the director who did Robert Overlord's Unwelcome, which came out last year. But also Robert Overlord's led to the first book. We were in post-production, and the producers are saying, well, we could do T-shirts, we could do a book. I said, I'll do the book. Let me do the book. And that was, you know, I was working at Orion at the time, and Gollancz is an imprint of Orion. And I said to Gollancz, look, I know you don't publish employees, but we got this movie coming out. It's got Ben Kingsley, Gillian Anderson. It's backed by the BFI. You know, it's actually happening. They want to do a novelization. What do you think? And they said, we're not sure, blah, blah, blah. So I said, well, look, I wrote 10,000 words. I sent them a synopsis. I sent them the screenplay and said, look, this is, I can do this. Let me do this. And it was Lisa Milton, who's now at HarperCollins, who said, okay, we're going to, and it was like Lisa Milton, John Wood, and Gillian Redfern. Gillian Redfern was my editor at Gollancz, and she basically taught me how to write a book. Oh, Anna, thank you very much. She loves Robert Overlord. Thank you very much, Anna. Yeah, that was my first novel, which is coming up for its 10th anniversary next year. And that was a really, really fun experience. I loved doing it. I discovered I loved writing. I mean, I'd read novels, you know, up there's top shelf is full of Terry Pratchett's over there, and Douglas Adams is, you know, a huge influence. And so I thought, I quite enjoyed this. And the odds of getting another film made, you know, in the UK are really, really tough. So yeah, and then the podcast came out of that because an old friend of mine, Mark DeVoe, who now lives out in Vancouver Island. He got in touch and said, "This is amazing. You've written a film, you've written a book." He said, "I've always wanted to write a book, but I always get stuck at about 20,000 words. What's the secret?" I said, "Well, there isn't. You just have to knuckle down and write." But one thing led to another. And we decided to start this podcast called the Bestseller Experiment, where we challenged ourselves to co-write a novel in 12 months and get it up the Kindle charts. But the best thing we did was we challenged our listeners to beat us to it. If you've got a half-written novel in a drawer somewhere, get it out, go for it. And the great thing is I've got 2 shelves there, sort of 2 deep, which are full of books that have been published by Gollancz and Avon and HarperCollins and Arrow, or self-published, or they've won awards, like Ian Sainsbury won the Kindle Storyteller Award, who because they heard someone on the podcast, they were inspired by, some of the authors like Ian Rankin, Sarah Pinborough, Mark Billingham, inspired to go on and do something amazing. And that was, an absolute joy. So it was, and I learned so much, as I'm sure you guys do, just from talking to, these incredible authors and learning that there is no one way of doing it. There is no secret. A lot of it is hard work, but you will pick up tips and tricks along the way that might work for you. So that's it in a kind of quick capsule, if you like. But yeah, it's been a hell of a ride. And it's and I was made redundant about 5 years ago from Orion, and that was great in a way, because it pushed me to just knuckle down and really write full time. And went out to something like 8 books, and 9 and 10 are on the way. So
wow,
yeah, I keep at it.
Yeah, it's an incredible story, and obviously your love of writing plays and the screenplays. Having the opportunity to write the novel must have been very exciting for you, but also a different challenge. Was that a challenge that you kind of took on, or was it kind of a tough transition? How did you approach writing a novel after writing screenplays?
Well, I'm sure, a lot of, your listeners and people here tonight will experience the same thing, which is you'll sit down and write something, you go, how do I even structure a sentence? You start overthinking it. You start second guessing yourself. You start worrying. I was lucky with Robot Overlords in that I had the structure of the screenplay, which I used as a template to write the novel, and then threw in scenes that either have been deleted or that I wanted to add to the story. But it was the guiding hand of Gillian Redfern at Gollancz, who was great, who would give me brilliant feedback on it. And I would read. I just went back to the well and read Terry Pratchett and Douglas Adams and all my favorite authors, that's something I still do now. Whenever I'm reading a book for enjoyment, but also thinking, I remember reading Frances Hardinge recently and thinking, oh, how she did that atmospheric this, and it's just you start highlighting things and making notes and thinking that's genius. So yeah, it's a constant learning process. I don't think you'll ever stop learning new ways to do things, and new ways to dig that little bit deeper, and new ways to convey something in a way that engages the reader and elicits some kind of emotion. Whereas with the screenplay, it's a much more collaborative thing. I see myself very much as in service to the director. The director is the one who has to stand there on the day with all the crew and the cast staring at them going, come on then, what are we going to do now? So it's my job to make their job as easy as possible and not be too obtuse or stamp my foot. If something isn't working, it isn't working. And that's one of the big lessons you learn from making a film, is you can't be too precious. Stuff gets rewritten all the time, gets added at the last minute. If it's not working, it has to go. So that's one big thing. But the thing I love about the novels is the interiority, the ability for me to get into character, to get inside that character's head, and dig into that emotional kind of state and see if I can engage the reader with that.
Absolutely.
Mark, I'm really interested in how you said, obviously, you go back to your inspiration and Terry Pratchett and Douglas Adams and people like that when you're starting maybe a new book, or you're at a bit where you think, how did they do this? How do you navigate between what somebody else has done and what's great and what works, and then finding your own voice and kind of going, oh, this is me, I like what they've done, I'm going to do this?
That's a really good question, because finding your own voice, it took me ages to find my own voice. When the plays that I wrote, get this, I was a big fan of David Mamet but also John Sullivan, who wrote Only Fools and Horses. Now, if you can imagine some weird hybrid love child of those two, that was the confusing voice that I was putting on stage. And the thing about theatre is you're in the room with the audience. I was very often acting in them as well. So you know what works and what doesn't work, you know, and you kind of think, and I was trying to be clever. You know, I'd read Stephen Fry, I'd read David Mamet. I think, oh, they're clever. I need to be clever like them. Whereas actually the biggest lesson you ever learn is just to be yourself. And I think I did that with the Witches of Woodville books and The End of Magic and The End of Dragons. Those are very much, they're more me than anything else. And I think the greatest compliment any reader can give me when I do a Comic-Con or whatever, they say, oh, you talk just like you write. You know, that's the kind of, that's a great compliment, I think. And it's such a huge, difficult lesson to learn, but in many ways it's the easiest one, because you could turn off all the pretension, turn off all the anxiety, and just, you know, put your thoughts on the page without fear. And first drafts are, I mean, I handwrite in the first draft, you know, so I will literally just, you know, scribble stuff in a notebook, and I will write things like, okay, how are they going to get out of this one? They're stuck in this situation. What's going to happen next? Just to get the pen moving, and just to start having that conversation with myself in a way that generates ideas. And usually you find by halfway down the page, I'm off. I figured it out, and off we go. So it's but this is, you know, being locked in a room by yourself with your thoughts. It does turn you a little bit mad, but you do discover your voice. I think you're absolutely right, Chris, because you look at other people's achievements and the way they do things and their style, and you think, that's brilliant. I'm not going to do it just like that, but I can see how Frances Hardinge or whoever has, or Kate Atkinson or whatever has done something. How can I deliver that in my own way? How can I, you know, convey that in my voice? And that's why I think it's a never-ending challenge, because you're always, you know, seeing new ways to do things and figuring out how you can have a go yourself. And it doesn't always work either. Sometimes you'll try something, you think, yeah, that isn't me. Can't do that. It doesn't sound right. It's like me, you know, dancing in clogs or something. It's just ridiculous. So let's get the comfy slippers back on. So
I was going to say, do you think, obviously having done the Bestseller podcast and working in Waterstones and working with all the booksellers and things like that, what is your opinion on structural advice in terms of like things like Save the Cat, for instance, that, you know, I was reading a Ben Aronovich novel the other day, and he dedicates the third book in his series to Save the Cat. So what's your opinion on that, and how helpful is it to authors that are maybe looking to take that step in their writing career towards the publishing route?
I think there are pros and cons to the whole hero's journey structure kind of thing. The pros are, I think it's an essential thing to learn. And it's an important thing to study, and it's why there are so many courses, because it's one of the few things that are actually teachable about creative writing. Because you can say, look, and all these courses, they all have a different shape. This one's a trapezoid, this one's a triangle, this is a pyramid with shaped like a Christmas tree. So they all have their different shapes. Essentially, they are the same thing. So I think it's important to learn these things, particularly, I mean, Ben came from TV, you know, he used to write for Doctor Who, and certainly when you're writing screenplays, that kind of structure is important. For me, the most important thing that's really changed the way I write is Craig Mazin, who does the Script Notes podcast. He did a lecture, which is available on YouTube. It's called How to Write a Movie. It's about 45 minutes long. Have a listen. It will change the way you write forever. He talks about central dramatic argument. He says structure's fine. Learn about structure. That's fine. You can learn it in an afternoon. It's all good. Yeah, but it's not everything. I mean, if you just stick with structure, and this happened with a lot of my early stuff, the hero is dragged along by the structure. Well, they've got to cross a threshold now, so I guess they should cross a threshold. Not thinking why they're doing it, or what their motivation might be. So end up with a hero that has no agency whatsoever and is just dragged along by the story. And I always struggled with that. But hearing Craig Mazin talking about central dramatic arguments and theme as the driving force of the story changed everything for me. And the way that it works is you figure out, when people say theme, you might go, oh, it's revenge, or it's love, or it's brotherhood or family. That's not a theme. That is a word. Theme, in terms of central dramatic argument, is a question that the story is asking. And it's one that can't be answered with a yes or no. It's something that it doesn't have to be mind-blowing or dazzlingly original, but it has to be a question that can create some kind of debate that people can take sides on. So, I mean, I do this with all. Hang on, I'll give you some examples. So, okay. So, a book I'm working on at the moment, the central dramatic argument is, should we focus on the now or the future or the past? Okay, so that's not mind-blowing, not necessarily very original, but the story comes at a big turning point in history for these characters, and some of them are sticking to the past. They hold grudges. They're not moving on from the past. Others are so focused on the future, they're missing out on what's happening in the now. Other characters are so focused on the now, they've not learned lessons from the past. You see how that immediately is. And if I ever get stuck, I open the book, because I have it on a post-it note at the beginning there. I open the book and go, yeah, that's what let's go back to that. Let's go back to theme. Go back to theme. How do we dramatize it? And I never get stuck anymore, particularly in that second act, which is where you normally start running out of steam. You start thinking, oh God, what happens now? Go back to theme. Go back to your central dramatic argument and challenge that story moment, challenge that character with that question, and in answering that, you'll get a story beat. You'll get some kind of little story moment out of that, and it's story feel. And since then, structure, yeah, it's important. It's kind of important, but its structure feels kind of second nature to me now, because we know, we've all seen Save the Cat and the hero's journey, and they're all very good, but they are, to quote Spock, the beginning of wisdom, not the end of wisdom. That's it's a good starting place. But for me, figuring out the theme and using that as my story fuel has been the big thing that's changed my writing in the last few years. Certainly since doing the Witches of Woodville books.
Incredible. Yeah, I love that. Great advice there. Yeah, we're going to not very quickly, but soon move on to your latest work. But before that, Chris, do you have any final questions on the road to writing? Because there's a lot in there, so I don't really want to jump past it too soon. But there's so much to ask. But have you got any questions before we move on to the latest book, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, the one question that sort of came up then as you were talking was about pace. In terms of, I found it really interesting how you said go back to the central theme, especially when things are lagging a little bit. But then how do you know? Like one of the things that I've been struggling with recently, I've been writing short stories, and the ending just seems to go boom. Because in my mind, I'm like, it needs to be 6,000 words. I'm clearly just typing away, and then suddenly I've got to 5,000 words, and I'm like, oh, I need to either edit it back and strip it back so I can sort of change it, or just bring the ending on type thing. And that's probably poor planning on my part, but I suppose how do I get better at that pacing element in terms of going and pushing the characters on at the right times, but also making you feel and fleshing out the characters as well at the same time?
Are you talking about a short story or a novel?
I think both, because I think, again, I've listened to like a few novels recently as well, and I think like Stephen King is notorious for his endings being a bit sudden and a bit shit, because you've got all this great characterization that you're just fully immersed in, and then suddenly, bang, it's finished.
One sec. If we ever get Stephen King on the show, if it ever happens,
You've said it now,
and I played it back to
him. Yeah, I mean, it could happen, and I'd love to have that debate. But yeah, how do you make a novel not like a Stephen King ending?
I generally don't start until I know what the ending is. Okay, so you start with the central dramatic argument, which poses some kind of question. Then you think about your protagonist and start thinking about how they end up. And once you figure out how they end up, you make them the opposite of that at the beginning of the story. So, so if you get to the end of your short story or your novel or whatever, and they're pretty much the same as they were at the beginning, I mean, there are, of course, this isn't a hard and fast rule. There are exceptions. If you read a Miss Marple or Sherlock Holmes, they're basically the same person by the end of it. When you're talking about that kind of serialized fiction where a character is challenged by a new puzzle or whatever to solve, they tend to be this. Columbo never really changes much, does he? But with generally what we respond to as readers is a character that goes on a journey. And so what I would say, if you're getting to the end and you fizzled out, it might be a good idea to try figuring out what the end is first. Then go back to, and then make the character the opposite of that. So if they're, I mean, you look at something like Breaking Bad is the great example of this. You look at him in that final season and compare him to that first episode. It's like two different people, but it's that boiling a frog thing of, with it gets a little hotter with each episode. And by the end, he's become this absolute monster. I mean, I was having this conversation with a writer the other day about that episode of Breaking Bad where the girl rolls over, and apologies if this slight trigger warning, she vomits in her sleep, and he could save her. He could save her in that moment, and he chooses not to. And that, there's no going back from that. So start thinking about, how do you get a character to that point? Start with the end of your story. If you've got someone blowing up a Death Star, you want them to be a farm boy who can, dreams of going into space at the beginning. They need to go through this incredible journey. So if you're getting to the end of something, you're thinking, this isn't what I envisioned, then maybe you need to retool it. Maybe you need to start with the ending, go back and work towards that ending. Is that helpful?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm already, the brain's ticking after that advice. So yeah, great. Thank you.
Incredible. I love that. Okay, let's move on to part 2, which is What's the Story? And you can tell us all about the End of Dragons, the second part of the series. And hopefully pitch it to us, or if not, give an overview, and then we'll get into that. So part 2 coming right up. So Mark, the End of Dragons.
Yes, well, the End of Dragons is the second part of the End of Magic trilogy. The End of Magic was originally published by Unbound about 5 or 6 years ago. And it was originally going to be a standalone, basically because I was doing crowdfunding and thought, this is a lot of work. I don't want to do this again. So I did it as a one and done. And then I got the rights back and thought, actually, you know what? I'd love to go back to that world. So the End of Dragons is set 5 years later. It's set in a world where mages used to draw their power from a moon, a lapis moon, a bright blue moon in orbit. Then one day, wallop, it's hit by a meteor and their power is diminished. And they're sent on missions that would have been really tricky with magic, basically Suicide Squad for fantasy without it. So with this second one, it's 5 years later, and there are stones have fallen to the world, and they get little, it's like having a small battery of magic for a short, and then it runs out, and suddenly they're powerless again. So they're scraping a living, and they're not doing very well, and they're doing terrible, terrible things in order to stay alive. And then they get coerced, our heroes get coerced into being sent to kill a dragon. It's the last dragon, somehow still alive. Why is it still alive? There's a mystery behind that. And they have to very reluctantly go and kill a dragon. And I just delight in torturing them for 370 pages. So, you talk about that thematic thing driving the story, and making them different by the end of the story. I wanted to take them through a big journey of change, whereby by the end of it they are they've kind of rediscovered who they are by the end of it. But it also has dragons as well. So and it's set in a fantasy. The whole End of Magic thing came out of me. I desperately wanted to write a fantasy novel. I'd loved reading fantasy when I was a kid. I loved Terry Pratchett, but I also this will age me as well. I remember LWT did a thing one weekend where they said, call in. This was Chris Tarrant said, call in and we'll give you a free novel. Ask for a thriller, a fantasy novel, or I forget what the other options were, but I was like, science fiction, fantasy, science fiction, fantasy. So I got sent a free copy of David Eddings' Pawn of Prophecy in the post, and I loved it. And, David Eddings, don't look at his Wikipedia page if crikey. But yeah, I was completely enthralled. And I had, I know for a lot of fantasy authors, Tolkien is their first fantasy. I had a teacher at school who introduced us to Ursula Le Guin as well, which again, very, the Earthsea stories, full of dragons, full of magic and wonder. And I wanted something in that world, but again, in my own kind of voice. And I love Joe Abercrombie. I love Scott Lynch. I remember picking up a Brandon Sanderson, and because I work for his publisher. And Brandon's lovely. He's just a lovely, lovely guy, and he writes his incredible work ethic, massive books. But I'd never read one, and I picked one up, and I noticed it had an appendices, and at the back it's like, if you take this magical element and add it to that magical element, it does this. I'm thinking, this is like the rules to a game. Is this important? Is this what fantasy is now? Because that. And look, not to diss it, clearly millions of people love this and it works for them, but it just didn't gel for me. And I just thought, you know what, I'm going to be really clever. I'm going to do a fantasy novel where there's no magic, so I don't have to do one of these magic systems. And of course, I'm about a third of the way into it where I thought, you complete idiot. Not only do you have to sort out a magical system, but you've got to get rid of that magical system and then figure out what happens when it's gone, what the consequences of it are. So that was the big challenge with the first one. But I really enjoyed it. I loved setting a story in a fantasy world where you've got a nice wry sense of humor running through it. The characters, to me, feel real. They're like me. They're quite lippy. They speak truth to power. They get quite angry at injustice, and it's I'm working on the third part now, and it will be a trilogy, and I will wrap it up with a trilogy. So the End of Gods is the third one. Her Dragons was instantly sold. Thank you, Anna. And I have to say, I do terrible things to dragons, just be warned, and griffins. It's been really, really fun to write. And it's very much in contrast to the Witches of Woodville stories, which are a bit gentler in tone. I pitched Witches of Woodville as Dad's Army meets Bedknobs and Broomsticks. So it's, set in a little Kent village during the Second World War, while the Battle of Britain's going on overhead. You've got this trio of witches seeing off different supernatural threats. And whereas The End of Dragons is a trilogy, you've got parts 1, 2, and 3. To understand this, you need to have read this. With the Woodville books, they all work as little standalone adventures that, you could start with the second or the third one and just jump in and it would make sense. So it's nice to have a contrasting series that offer different things, not only to the reader, but to me. They exercise different sort of story muscles, if you like.
I think, sorry, Chris. I was going to say, it's an element of sadness when you invest your time and effort into a trilogy and you get onto that third book knowing it has to end now at this point. These characters, like you said, that are almost like real people in your mind, that you've got to take them to a conclusion in some respect. So how do you gear yourself up to write that third book, knowing that certain things are going to end and that's what you've done then in that sort of...
it's like I say, I'm about 9,000 words into the third book, so at the moment I'm loving it. Anything's possible. I haven't decided who's going to live or die yet. I've got an idea. Certainly my protagonist Sandra Bree, who's the mage that you most relate, or at least I most relate to through the stories. I know how he's going to end up. So we talked about knowing what your ending is and how it's going to end up. I know how he's going to end up. It's just how badly am I going to torture him along the way to that ending. But I think it's nice to wrap something up. I do get a bit fed up with trilogies that have spin-offs and then spin-offs of spin-offs and what have you, which, the story, just tell me the story and we can all get on with it and move on. Whereas with the Woodville books, that is very much a serial. I could write these for the rest of my life. There's the plan is to go all the way through the Second World War, and if that works, we'll do the 50s and 60s as well. So it's that is very much more in that kind of Columbo way, in that you come back to a precinct and you have a different story each time. Whereas this, the Magic series, very much is a beginning, middle, and an end. And I'm quite looking forward to wrapping things up and doing things in a way that will be conclusive, that there will be no going back from these things. And I think, again, we talked about getting compliments. I've had, certainly in the first book, The End of Magic, there is a particular scene in that where I've had threats from people saying, this made me cry, this made me a hot mess, this destroyed me. And I'm like, yes, job done. That for me is one of the highest compliments. So that's always the high watermark for me, wrecking my poor readers.
What I love about fantasy is the complex world systems and the world building, and it's something that I admire as an author. That is, I probably way above my skill level, and it must take a lot of detail and time and effort to do that. But when you talked earlier about how you put the character's journey at the forefront and that sort of thing, how do you kind of balance the two? So I guess what I'm trying to say is that the world's not too overpowering, or the character's not too much overpowering, so that the fantasy isn't quite there. How do you kind of balance that?
It all has to be in service of the story. So I actually don't do a huge amount of world building beforehand. I have an idea. I had this idea. We'll have this moon. They draw their power from the moon. Okay, what happens when that moon is destroyed? What effect will that have on these various societies? I wanted it to be a fairly familiar fantasy landscape so that people didn't have to overthink what it was. I'm taking that fantasy that you love and I'm smashing it up and seeing what happens, when we scatter it to the four winds and see what happens there. So the world building has evolved. Certainly in the second book, there are because magic is going through a massive period of change, and people like natural philosophers or scientists and doctors and people who have been held back by magic, because if you broke a leg, someone could come along and heal it. Suddenly they've got the center stage. They're doing things they've never been able to do before. So we're seeing these great bounds in technology that is kind of making magic actually look a bit old hat. Without getting too depressing, the books were kind of inspired by Brexit, by Trump, David Bowie dying, that whole, we've all gone to this terrible universe where the bad things are happening. I thought, let's take some people with some privilege, people who have it good but don't know it. So these mages who, they work for kings or they work for free, they have high morals, they can always take the high ground, which is easy when you're powerful. But if you take all that power away, are they still taking the high ground? Can they still take the moral high ground? Can they still do that noble thing? Let's test that and see if they do. And that was great, just prodding, pushing them to the edge and seeing how far before they actually snapped. I am a monster. I think if you're going to be a novelist or a screenwriter, you have to be like an Old Testament god to your characters. And you're constantly zapping them with lightning. And whatever genre you're working in, could even be romance or crime or whatever, just constantly going, yeah, take that, try. And every time, if they can dust themselves off and get up again and get on with it, then I think readers engage with that. Just push it to the absolute extreme.
I love that. I was going to say, I know, obviously, these are a set of novels now, but would you, obviously, the more you're talking about it, the more I can see, like, I'd love to see it on TV, because I've seen, like, Disney Plus do loads of great things with Star Wars and things like that. And obviously Game of Thrones was huge, and you're sort of playing in a similar realm to these ideas. But again, it's such a unique idea, having that magic and fade away and the fantasy be flipped on its head. Would you ever be tempted to put them into a screenplay format and send them out into the ether?
It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work. It's so hard. I mean, what have the following got in common? Okay, so Joe Abercrombie, Ben Aronovich, Jodie Taylor, who else? Michelle Paver, right? British fantasy authors who've sold millions, and still their stuff isn't on TV, because fantasy is hard. Producers don't understand it. They see it as difficult. It's expensive. It's still seen as niche. It's really expensive to get fantasies, which is why they're remaking Lord of the Rings, which is why they're doing endless series of Game of Thrones, because they worked. Yeah. So let's do more of it. So I think the idea that if you want to be a novelist, you want your stuff on TV, write a cozy crime novel set in a small town in England, because that's cheap to make. Yeah. And viewers love it. The kind of people who watch broadcast TV love a murder mystery. They don't necessarily watch fantasy. The only fantasy we get on British TV is Doctor Who. That's it, really. You occasionally get something that is based on a book, and it's usually done in BBC working with HBO. It has to be international, in which case it needs to appeal to the Americans. And a lot of British science fiction fantasy is, it appeals to some Americans, but it's seen as cult stuff. So it's really, I'd love, the Witches of Woodville went to an acquisitions thing of a big film company recently, and they said no. They liked it, but it's just too British. So I'd love it, but if you're out there thinking I'm going to write a screenplay and sell the screenplay of my novel, it'll be, unless you want to write screenplays and learn something from doing that, which is a great thing to do. You're exercising all different kind of story muscles and writing muscles. Have a go with it, but do it with the expectation of absolutely nothing happening. Because even the one, a lot of those authors, Ben Aronovich, stuff has been in development and fallen at the last hurdle, and it's been optioned again, and now it's in development again. There are absolutely no guarantees that any of these things are actually going to happen. And TV and film is in the golden age of streaming is over. broadcast TV is dying on its knees because the advertisers have all switched to online ads or influencers. The streaming age is over. Netflix has come out on top. But even Netflix now talking about putting commercials in, to shows. So it's a really, really tough time. So the thing about my book, when I write screenplays, I'm in service of the production. John and I wrote a horror movie, Unwelcome. Horror sells internationally. There's two kinds of films where you can come up with an original idea and have it sell internationally. And that's horror, because they'll watch horror in the Far East, they'll watch it in South America, they'll watch it in Africa, they'll watch it all over Europe. They love horror. And LGBTQ films, because there are festivals all over the world where they celebrate LGBTQ movies, which is wonderful. So anything else either has to be based on a book or a toy or something historical. So if you can come up with a new spin on an old idea, which is what happened with Nautilus, which is TV show. I came up with I went to Hollywood after Robot Overlords. I did what they call the water bottle tour, which is where you go around LA for a week having meetings, and every time you meet someone, they give you a water bottle to drink because it's so hot, and the footwell in your car fills up with water bottles. So I did the water bottle tour, and I went to Amazon, and I went to Jim Henson, and I went to DreamWorks. But my big mistake was I pitched original ideas, and they weren't interested. They were saying, well, what about, and I'd only written Robot Overlords at this point, saying, what about, you got any books? Do you know of any books that we could option? So, going there with the original idea is a bad idea. But when I came back from that trip, I figured, okay, I need to come up with an IP idea, an intellectual property idea. So I made a list of everything that was in the public domain and scratched off everything that had been done to death. Vampires, zombies, they've all been done to death. I was left with H.G. Wells, which back then was about to go into public domain, and Jules Verne. And I realized no one had ever told the story of the young Captain Nemo, because in Mysterious Island, on his deathbed, he talks about he returned to India during the 1857 rebellion, lost everything, his family, his land, so he went to take revenge on the British East India Company. I thought, no one's done that. So I put together a pitch deck. It was like a 16-page pitch deck, and I sold it in my first meeting because it was based on a property that people knew, but it was a new take on an old idea. Now, I didn't end up writing on that. It's a long story. We'd need another hour. But it was picked up by Disney. They filmed it in Queensland. Then Disney dropped it because that's what Disney do these days. And then it's been picked up by Amazon Prime in the UK. So it's coming in October. I have a teeny, tiny credit on about the third page. When the credits shrink and immediately starts playing the next episode, that's when I think my credit will come up. So that's, but I made money from that, so if you can, rather than go, I'm gonna, come up with my original idea, big fantasy idea, maybe find an old fantasy novel, that's in the public domain, come up with a new spin on it that resonates with, because obviously with Nemo, you're talking about an Indian, prince who is taking revenge on, a white hierarchy that, kind of feels relevant at the moment. So, that's one of the reasons that was picked up. And it's also about capitalism and greed and all that good stuff as well. So if you can find out with a take that's kind of relevant to the modern world, then maybe that's the way to go.
That's great advice. I love that. And as a horror screenwriter, I need to pick your brains. Okay, we're going to go to part 3 of the show, community questions. If you've got questions for our guest, Mark, please send them in now. And we will ask our staple questions while you're doing so. So coming right up, community questions. Me and Mark were dancing very much in sync right there.
I love these groovy tunes you got. This is great. And what you don't know, listeners, is these guys are playing it themselves. They're counting themselves in. It's all live. It's all live now.
Well, they're quite nostalgic because when we first started the show and it was just the audio podcast, I used to put these little weird stings, I think they call them, into the podcast. And so we kept them. And they still remind us of the old days.
Love it.
Cool. Right. So, Mark, if you could take any character from the world of fiction and you could choose what to do with them, whether to put them into one of your stories or, if you really wanted to, take them out for the day, what fictional character would you choose and why?
Well, funnily enough, this is something I've seriously been considering, even though, there are huge copyright issues with all of this. But with the next few Witches of Woodville books, my hero Faye, she's going to be going off in a slightly different direction, a slightly more adventurous direction as the war proceeds. And there was a part of me that thought, wouldn't it be great if she talks about an adventure she had with a Dr. Jones from America? Maybe this archaeologist that she met and had an adventure. And it happened off screen, but she commenced in this Dr. Jones. So I'm thinking, yeah, it'd be great to get Indiana Jones in there somewhere. Yeah. Obviously, Lucasfilm, if you're listening, Disney, yeah. Disney, you owe me one. So yeah, it's that would be great because these kind of war years, I think it's in some of the novels or what have you, they're only kind of hinted at. So there's a whole adventure there that he could go on with Faye. So yeah, I'd love to.
So a little side fling.
Yeah, well, they both kind of have a similar thing where they live in the real world, but there is magic and strange things happen, and so I think they're quite compatible actually. Yeah.
Nice.
Brilliant. Yeah, love to see that.
Can you hear that?
Is that the rain? Was that lightning?
It's the thunder.
Oh wow!
It's been if you watch, if someone watches this back and see me move my head every 2 minutes, the lightning is getting closer and closer, and it's getting louder and louder. It's very close right now.
Yeah, the next question that we have is if you could change the ending to any fictional story, whether it be TV, film, or books, what would you change the ending to and why?
Well, this is difficult because we were talking about endings and how important they are, and I'd feel loath to say to Dickens or whoever, or even Stephen King. I'm not going to tell him how to change any of these endings. But the one that I've thought, this is a weird one, Mr. Tickle from the Mr. Men books, because he's one of the few, seriously, he's one of the few that doesn't learn a lesson, Mr. Tickle. He's got serious consent issues, and he's still tickling by the end of the story, and that is not a good lesson to teach children. I mean, it's one of these things that when I was a kid, people thought nothing of putting their giving you a kiss or giving you a cuddle. And now, I mean, it's funny. I watch BBC archive clips on YouTube and what have you, and you'll see some DJ or some presenter interviewing a child, and they'll touch them. And my wife and I are watching. Go, don't touch them, don't touch them. So that whole attitude to personal space has really changed now. So yeah, Mr. Tickle needs to go on a course. That's how he
does. Yeah. Oh, now you think about it, you put that in perspective as an older Mr. Tickle. He's now Mr. Toucher. So
he's now Mr. on a list.
That's one of the best answers to that question I think we've ever had. I love that. I'm gonna have to make a T-shirt about that. Anyway, so where are we? It's getting so loud out here, guys. Sorry.
So whilst Chris is looking in the comments, I'll ask the next question that we have. So this is a bit of a morbid one. You're looking back on your deathbed and you're looking back at your writing career. What would you be happy with? What is success to you?
Well, I'm supposed to be profound with my answer. I'm supposed to say, I'd love to have a writing legacy where the children of the future will gather around my books and say, we've learned something from this. But frankly, at the moment, I'd be happy with a new bathroom. I know we're not supposed to say crude stuff about money, whatever, but frankly, the pay, the average author in the UK earns about $7,000. Okay, I'm doing better than that at the moment, but there are days where it feels like God, it's I've had a movie out, but haven't made any money from that. I've got books out, haven't really made much money from them. So it is a struggle. I'm lurching from invoice to invoice at the moment, So, and it would be nice just to be able to get a really nice bathroom, because our bathroom needs changing. Okay, we got the shower door leaks. It's a whole thing. So we are barely keeping our head above water at the moment. So yeah, my success at the moment looks like a wet room with a nice power shower. That's what it looks like at the moment. I know it's kind of crude. We're not supposed to talk about money, and we're all supposed to be hoity-toity and highfalutin. But yeah, give me a bathroom and I'll be happy, mate.
I'm glad you said that, Mark, though, because I saw a thread on Substack the other day from an author, and for the life of me, I can't remember his name. He wrote a novel called The Warehouse that was really popular. It's not coming to mind, but it was picked up, made into a TV series. He got enough money to quit his job and become a full-time writer. but then his success sort of trickled down from there, and he's not, every book that he released, he had less success, and then he got dropped and things like that. And he was talking about money and saying just how much he was getting and how difficult it was. And it's something that, even though we've had over like 300 shows, is not really touched on that often, because like you said, people don't like to go into that realm.
They don't like to talk about it because they're usually on the publicity trail and they have to be positive. But I've worked in the industry long enough to know that like if you're working in an office and you're there for 5 years, each year you get a pay rise. It might be a sucky pay rise, but you're getting a pay rise to essentially, hopefully, keep up with the cost of living. And being an author is generally the only career where, for most of us, we get our biggest paycheck with our first book. And then when we renegotiate deals, we're knocked back and back and back to the point where the advances are, I can't live on this. I can't. This is not a living. So, which is why so many authors are going indie, because they've kind of figured, why am I, so they're getting the rights back to their books. They're figuring, why am I giving the publisher all this money when I could do this myself? Me, I hope to do a bit of both, because I like my publisher. Frankly, there's still that credibility thing. If you're published by a traditional, you get to go to festivals and things like that. Whereas if you're indie, there's still a huge prejudice against indie authors. And I think this is going to be the future for a lot of authors, in that they're not just that thing of getting, the big advance and every few years just doesn't exist anymore. It's all done with, the publishers will look forensically at your sales and think of every excuse not to give you more money. Simple as that. So it's I know every author I know is looking at new ways to earn money, new revenue streams. Obviously, you got that top 1%. Some of the names you see scrolling across the screen here, who have massive international successes, sell lots of rights. The books continue to sell and sell and sell. They are the rarity. They are the exception to the rule. For the rest of us, it's a tough gig. It's a really, really tough gig to sort of keep your head above water, which is why I'm doing a bit of everything, which is why I'm writing in different genres. I've just been, the last year, I've been working with another author on a revenge thriller, which we have machine tooled to be as commercial as it possibly can be, to be that international bestseller that we want it to be, that's going to get me a bathroom. So it's...
I love it.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say just as well, with Substack and the platform that it is, a lot of people are moving to serializations of just each week they drop in another chapter, and obviously they're building up a following, they're building up people who are reading it along every week, and then they're seeing some authors anyway are seeing an increase in sales when the book that was available on a week-to-week basis is then suddenly in the physical form, and people, because they're invested in it and they've invested the time, they're buying the copies, and they've got a good following and obviously a direct email list as well. Do you see more of that sort of like approach to, I say publishing, but I suppose it's self-publishing in the future, in terms of, I've got this following, I've got all these people behind me.
Absolutely.
I don't need anybody else.
The most important thing you can build is that direct relationship with your readers, which is, if you go to my website, you can sign up to my newsletter, get loads of free short stories, and I then have that direct relationship with you, where there's no Facebook between you and me. And my co-presenter on the Bestseller Experiment, Mark DeVoe, is a musician, and his band was on MySpace. They had like 80,000 followers on MySpace, and along comes Facebook. Those followers are all gone, and he had no way of tracing them. Whereas if he'd had a newsletter, they'd still be following him. So that was a big lesson for him to learn. So, develop your own website, develop your own newsletter, have that direct relationship. I sell all my books. That may look like vanity. That's actually my stock room. So people can order signed copies from me and ask for dedications and buy direct from me, which is, I'm taking pre-orders for the next book, and it's great. It's a nice little, it's all these different trickles of income. I've started a new podcast. I've started a thing where I give, writing advice, and you pay me 20 quid a month or whatever, so all of these things are all different sources of income and streams of income, because again, that idea of the big advance, and we're all, you'll know this, guys, and if writers out there will know this, if you've had a book published and you meet someone who knows nothing about the book industry, they assume you're a millionaire. They assume you're rolling in it. And, you have to explain to them that's just not how it works. I didn't help myself, though. When Unwelcome came out, I had BBC Kent come round here, BBC South East, actually interview me in here, spoke to me for an hour. Okay, and I thought, an hour, this is going to be good. But they used 90 seconds. And the 90 seconds they used was where I said, Warner Brothers UK paid £1.1 million for the script, which is the most they've ever paid for a horror script in the UK. Nice little nugget of information. Thought might make an interesting soundbite. What I didn't say was that went on the budget. But what the story was, local author, a millionaire. It's like, no, that money didn't come to me. It went on the budget of the film. So now I had to explain every family gathering. They're going, here it comes, money bags. No, I am broke. Seriously. That was 4 years ago, please. So yeah, it's people don't understand. Wow. From the outside looking in, people don't really understand.
Oh, brilliant. Right, we are 5 minutes over the hour, so let's get some questions in very quickly. We've got a couple in there. Anya, thank you. She says, if you had to spend 1 month as a dragon or a vampire, which would you choose and why? Would you go back to normal after the month?
No question, a dragon. Absolutely a dragon. Vampire. I'm over vampires. They're such self-indulgent so-and-sos. Dragon, I get to fly and breathe fire and scare people. And I've got a list of people who I'd like to go and, breathe fire on. So yeah, dragon, no question. And would I go back to normal? I think these sort of thing you have to try once and get back to
Chris, would you pick one of those two to be for a month?
If it was a month, I'd probably pick the dragon because that'd be more fun. But I think just because vampires live longer and could adopt a more human form, I think I'd have to go with that long term because the dragon would stand out and you'd have people trying to slay you before you knew it. So.
Yeah, no, I'd be dragon too, being Welsh. I have to.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. The next question we have for you, or the last one, should I say, which is from Anna. Thank you very much. You mentioned Jules Verne and H.G. Wells. Do you have a favorite story of one of theirs, and how would you adapt it?
War of the Worlds, no question. I'm of a certain age, so I grew up listening to the album. I've forgotten his name now. But the War of the Worlds concept album, Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds, which I loved. The theme tune to many a long drive with my family on holiday on those terrible camping holidays. When we moved from London when I was 8 years old to Leatherhead in Surrey, which gets mentioned in the War of the Worlds. So and that was roughly when I read it. I'm flicking through it. There are Martians in Leatherhead, I couldn't believe it. It was just amazing. So, Mum, they mentioned this is in the book. So, and it's never been done properly. I know BBC had a go a couple of years ago, and they're like, it's authentic. First of all, they made it post First World War and made it more Edwardian. Than they always have to tinker with it or do something. So, I won't mind having a go at a proper War of the Worlds adaptation. Actually, I think the trouble is because they did it just a couple of years ago, and frankly, I think they fluffed it. No one will want to touch it for another 10 years. So, unless you come, when I said I had those two, I did have an idea for a sort of War of the Worlds sequel, but now everyone's done a War of the Worlds sequel. So it's kind of, it's not as original as it was, but yeah, I love that story. I mean, who doesn't love, giant Martian war machines stomping through Surrey? Who wouldn't love that? So that's my favorite.
It's amazing, isn't it, when you read something that kind of relates to where you are. And one of the funniest things that happened for me watching a film was when I went to see World War Z in the cinema.
Yeah.
And they land in Cardiff at the end. After traveling around the entire world, they suddenly arrive in Cardiff. And I was like, what? The whole cinema gasped. Very random. Okay, right. So we did talk about you reading us out on the show.
We're way over time, though. These good people have suffered enough, haven't they? Surely.
If you are happy to move on with that, that's fine. Yeah, but if that is the case, where can people find out more about you? Where can they buy your latest work, and where can they follow you?
Mark Stay. There aren't many of us about. There is a markstay.com, which is some guy in Brisbane. Don't go to him. Mark Stay Writes, WRITES is my website. I'm on pretty much every social media platform. I'm pretty easy to find. I'm always plugging my books, but I try and find a balance. It's important to have a balance of, real life and what have you. If you go to witchesofwoodville.com, that's where you'll find all about all of my books, not just the End of Dragons and the Magic as well. You can buy signed copies there, get them, dedicated and what have you. I've just started a podcast called Mark Stay's Creative Differences, where I like you, talk to authors, and we have a thing called the Green Room, which is twice a month. We have a private Zoom chat where people send me questions, I answer their questions on writing and craft and all that good stuff as well. So I'm all over the place, mate. Yeah, so I'm going to be at Fantasy Con in Chester if you're there in October. So and at the MCM Comic Con at the end of October as well. So maybe see you there.
Beautiful.
Fantastic. Yeah, we will put links to your links in the description of the show and in the Substack as well. So if you are watching this back, pick up those links and go and have a visit. Mark, all I can say is thank you very much. I know we could chat for a much longer time. A lot of good stuff going on there. So thank you for sharing your story with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on. Really appreciate it, chaps. Thank you.
Brilliant. Have a great week, everybody. A great weekend, and we'll see you all very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.